Alright, good morning everybody. Finally back on after a week-long hiatus. Not just, it was unwilling. I was forced into, I call it YouTube jail. They talk about Facebook jail. I was in YouTube jail. My wife said I was the chaplain in the YouTube jail. Anyway, we're back to doing Quora questions. And we have a question from Ala De Leon. If a Jewish couple adopts a non-Jewish child, what would be the process for this child to be recognized as Jewish? And the answer is it'd be the same as any other non-Jewish person being recognized as Jewish. We call it conversion. In Hebrew, it's gerus. The word ger is often translated as a stranger. It means really, someone who has come to sojourn or a sojourner. And it makes that noun into a verb, essentially, or here it's another. Gerus is actually also a noun, or giur is a noun. The process of conversion, or the process of becoming a convert or a proselyte to Judaism. The only major difference here would be, again, which is not a difference between adoption and other reasons why one might convert, is that this is what we call a ger katan, the minor convert if the child is less than 13 years old for a boy or 12 years old for a girl. We're talking here within the realms of Orthodox Judaism, but this is also similar to the process in the conservative movement. The Reform movement is much more liberal about these things and does not have the same requirements, and that is the major reason why within Orthodox Judaism we don't really recognize the conversions done within the Reform movement, but this is not really the time to talk about that. For now, let's focus on what the Orthodox process would be. Excuse me. And I know of people who actually became connected into the Orthodox community because of the desire to adopt a child. I was a rabbi for 5 years in Richmond, Virginia, and well before the time I was there, in the synagogue where I served, there was a story that became very famous, and there was a book about it called The Bamboo Cradle, about a Jewish family who adopted an Asian child, and part of the process was that the rabbi made it clear that if you want to adopt this child, you want the child to be Jewish, the child would have to convert. And in order to convert, we'll get to that point, that you yourselves will have to go over some sort of an internal conversion, turn your life around and adopt, the Orthodox Jewish faith and the Orthodox Jewish lifestyle. And they did so, and they became rather pious and pillars of the community. And so quite often this can be a means of bringing, not that it's any greater this way or the other way, but I know a lot of people within the Jewish community are concerned with bringing people who are Jewish but not religious back into the fold. I don't know how important that is personally. I think it would be equally great to whether we bring in a convert or we bring in someone who was born Jewish. Either way, we're bringing someone to Torah. Either way, I don't like these racial boundaries of saying, it's more important for us to bring back the lost sheep of Israel, to borrow an idiom from our Christian neighbors. But the same thing within their ranks. It's also a matter of dispute as to whether or not this is what is the more important thing to do as far as converting people into their religion, which obviously we disagree with the religion. In any event, respectfully so, in any event, the process of conversion is as follows. whether it's for an adult or for a child, if we're talking about a male, he must be circumcised. If he's already circumcised, and not for the sake of conversion, even according to some opinions, if he was circumcised with the assumption that he was Jewish, and he indeed wasn't, although that is a matter of dispute, some say as long as it's a religious circumcision, either way. Beyond that, the next, if the child or the adult male is already circumcised, a small amount of blood is drawn from that organ, from the area of the circumcision. Very, very minute amount of blood. Usually what we use for a conversion is the same type of a lancet that's used for today. The most hygienic manner of doing this, sterile manner of doing this, is what's used for checking for diabetes. So it's a very small amount of blood. And then beyond that is immersion in a mikveh. A mikveh is a ritual bath. It's about 250 gallons minimum, which means big enough for an adult to fit in their entire body immersed all the way under the water. And this is done in the presence of a Beis Din, a Beth Din, a rabbinical court, which is at least 3 Jewish men who are pious and observant, believing, with sufficient scholarship to understand the meaning of what they are doing. Generally, ideally, they should be 3 rabbis. Not necessarily so. Really, any 3 pious Jewish men who are not related to each other and not related to whatever litigant is coming before the court can form this tribunal. But politically, we've pushed that it should be at least 1 rabbi and ideally 3 rabbis who serve some kind of rabbinical role in this position. And then beyond that, and that's where the conversion is done. Now, the difference between an adult and a child is as follows. An adult is able to make an adult, and for an adult here we mean a man over 13 years old, 13 in 1 day, and a woman over 12 years old, 12 in 1 day, are for this considered to be an adult. And that's, of course, we know in the Jewish circles, the bar mitzvah or the bat mitzvah, or we say bas mitzvah. Beyond that, so an adult can make their own decision, and we ask them if they are accepting, or they make a statement in front of the court that they are accepting the commandments, the responsibility of the commandments, meaning we explain to them that up until this time they were there is no sin for someone who's not Jewish to do most things that are a sin for a Jew. You know, the only things that are a sin for a non-Jew within the purview of Judaism are very egregious, grave sins like murder, adultery, and theft. You know, we call these in the rabbinical tradition the 7 laws of Noah. And they're much of the 10 Commandments minus the Sabbath. The Sabbath is particularly for the Jewish people, as it says in Scripture, between me and the children of Israel, even though the roots of the Sabbath go back to creation. And then beyond that, also honoring parents there are really no positive commandments, thou shalt, in the 7 laws of Noah. They're only thou shalt nots. It doesn't mean that a non-Jew should not honor his parents. It means, excuse me, he doesn't have the same obligation to honor his parents as someone within the Jewish community has. the obligation to honor the parents, but nonetheless, if a non-Jew honors his parents, he is rewarded, just like really the truth is with almost all of the commandments that were given to the Israelites. A non-Jew without conversion would receive some reward for doing so, but the reward is much greater if he converts, because he has the full obligations, and with obligation comes greater reward, whereas when one volunteers, the reward is less than when one is obligated, even though that might seem counterintuitive, but there are many reasons for that, which we can explain at a different time if someone would like me to explain why that is. What we call the mitzvah v'osa ve'enu mitzvah v'osa. That's the term. The one who's commanded and does, and the one who's not commanded and does. And we do understand the convert to be commanded because he's converted, and so therefore he's commanded. In any event, back to what we were discussing. We have this when the adult, meaning even a teenager and older, converts, they are taking the responsibility for themselves to observe the commandments, meaning the kosher laws, the Sabbath laws, that are not obligated to the non-Jew, and there's nothing wrong. It's not a sin for the non-Jew to eat pork or to eat, meat and milk cooked together, to eat the forbidden fats from a domestic mammal that is kosher. The animal itself is kosher, but certain parts of the animal are not. So, if the non-Jew would eat that, there's no sin in that. But for the Jew it is, and so what we tell them is, until now you could have eaten these things and not been punished, and now if you eat it, you are punished. Until now, you could have violated the Sabbath and not been punished, and now if you take this obligation, if you violate the Sabbath, you are punished. And so then, after explaining this, we have a positive statement in some form. Usually the way I do it is I simply ask the convert if he is accepting the commandments of the Torah, the commandments of the rabbis, which have the authority from the Torah, and the Jewish customs that are universally binding within our community, which are, that doesn't mean to say that they would not be accepting other customs that are not universally binding, but they are at least, for sure, in order to convert, they would have to accept the customs that are universally accepted and binding, which are very few actually, and there are many, many more customs that are not universally binding or accepted, and some question whether or not we should use the term custom to refer to those Maimonides, to the opinion that we should not. And then beyond that, we have, at least according to Maimonides, that they should affirm verbally that they believe in the dogmas of our faith, which according to Maimonides are 13 rather limited but wide-ranging dogmas. It's not the Baltimore Catechism of the Catholic Church, even though there are many beliefs that exist within the Jewish community, it's generally accepted that these 13 are the ones that are binding within our orthodoxy as being dogmatic, whereas others would, there are those who disagree only to the tenor of how dogmatic they are, but in general these 13 are accepted Jewish beliefs, even if not accepted in a dogmatic form. So then the next step is, and so generally I will ask those things before the convert immerses in the mikveh, and then I'll reaffirm them after they come out of the mikveh, just to say, once again, do you affirm those things that I just asked you before? That's the way I generally will do it, just to be on the safe side of kind of both sides of the immersion. And that's it. And once this person comes out of the mikveh, they're just as Jewish as anyone else. I remember it was a controversial character who I don't agree with his views about Zionism, was Rabbi Meir Kahane. And people often accused him of being a racist because of his animus to the Palestinian cause. And he often said he didn't have animus to the cause, it's just that he has a different cause and he wishes them well. But then he would always, whenever he was accused of racism, he would say if Arafat would convert tomorrow, he would be just as Jewish as Kahane. So, and that's true. I think Lubavitcher Rebbe, also I'm not a Lubavitcher Chassid, but I think Lubavitcher Rebbe will always tell the convert, you're just as Jewish as me. And I wish some of his Hasidim would kind of be more welcoming of potential converts. But nonetheless, that's how it is. So when it comes to a child, though, legally the child does not have the legal standing, even if the child could be 11 years old and be intelligent enough to understand this. And therefore, within the 7 laws of Noah, it's not like there's a bar mitzvah age the way there is in the Jewish law. In the 7 laws of Noah, it's when one is understanding. A child could be understanding at 8 or 9 years old and therefore be obligated in the 7 laws of Noah. But but as far as conversion, as far as Jewish law, the obligation comes down when one is of age. So, and then there's a second age actually of 20 years old of when one is actually furthermore seen in the eyes of heaven as being obligated, meaning that we generally say that no one receives a heavenly punishment before they're 20 years old, but the earthly punishment could be rendered from 13 years old. For example, the way that was explained once at a bar mitzvah I attended was that, if the obligations are on the parent until that time. So if a child breaks a window, he's playing baseball, and he breaks a neighbor's window, and he's 11 or 12 years old, it's his parents' obligation to pay for that window. And if once he's 13 years old, it's the child himself is now an adult. It's his obligation to pay for that window. That's basically, in a nutshell, how it's viewed in Jewish law. Whereas under the 7 laws of Noah, if a child is old enough to understand that stealing is wrong, and he could be 7 or 8 years old, he could already be liable under the laws of Noah, even for criminal punishment, and be tried as an adult. It's the same thing we have in civil law, although the age is much later, of when someone is tried as an adult or tried as a juvenile, etc. So when it comes to conversion, though, what we say is Zachin Lola Adam Shalo B'Fanav. We can do a favor for a person without his approval, not in front of him is the actual translation of the idiom. And since it's understood that conversion to Judaism is a merit, is a positive thing, which that goes against what often is heard in the Jewish world, that, the best thing for the non-Jew is to keep the 7 laws of Noah. No, if a non-Jew believes in the Torah, he should really have a goal of converting to Judaism. Now, if he recognizes that with his lifestyle, he's not going to be able to keep the Sabbath, he's not going to be able to keep kosher, etc., which really isn't that hard, and I think a lot of the stringencies that we've added on have gotten in the way of bringing people into the fold, and that's unfortunate and wrong, in my opinion, as someone who's generally pretty strict about a lot of things personally, but I don't think we should be imposing those stringencies on anyone. We should get to what is the basics. There are a lot of very basic things in Judaism. We want to, and and that includes rabbinical law. But then beyond that, there are stringencies that are above and beyond the law that should not be imposed on anyone. But nonetheless, we have reasons why we do things the way we do them, which all have a lot of wisdom to them, and so one must be understanding both sides of the issue. But in any event, back to what we were saying about the conversion. So we say that Zachin lo l'adam shelo b'fanav, we are allowed to do someone a favor without his knowledge, and so here it's without the legal knowledge of what is involved here. And even if technically he would have the knowledge, it could be 11 years old and be knowledgeable enough to understand what is going on here, and yet we go by this of Zachin lo l'adam shelo b'fanav, that the court itself can convert a child without the child agreeing to it. However, the way that statement of the Talmud has been interpreted is as follows: that in order that we can say that we give a person a merit without his knowledge, that we do someone a favor without their knowledge, it has to be a favor to them. And so the way that it's understood is as follows: is that if a person is being raised to live a pious Jewish life, then it is a merit to them to be a Jew. But if they're not being raised to live a proper Jewish life, then it is not a merit to them. And there are different interpretations of what is the level of how much of a merit is necessary in order for the conversion to be valid. And then at that point, the conversion is valid, and so therefore, probably the biggest example as far as a child is concerned is that let's say there was wine or grape juice. Usually grape juice is pasteurized just in the process of making grape juice, but theoretically, I'm saying commercial grape juice, but nonetheless we are strict to only buy kosher approved grape juice as well as wine. But if wine is not mavushal, it's not cooked, right? It's not pasteurized. Such wine is very easy to become not kosher. If a non-Jew picks up the bottle or the cup that it's in, certainly if they pour it, and if a Jew who's not pious does so, the wine picks up the cup, the wine becomes not kosher. Different levels of whether it's a biblical prohibition or a rabbinical prohibition, now is not the time to discuss. So here, if the child converted, he can pick up that wine and the wine remains kosher because he is a Jew. Even if he converted as an infant. The next step, though, is what do we say about once the child becomes of age, when they have their bar mitzvah? And what's the general practice is that we let the child know that at this point you have to kind of accept on your own that this is the life you want to continue living, and then they are Jewish for the rest of their lives. However, if they do not make that they do not want to do it, and they would later want to become Jewish, most opinions would say they would have to convert again if when they were given the opportunity to reject their Jewish status because they converted as a child. They have, some say they have the choice to do that. However, it's not so simple the way, again, that it's presented, that it's necessary to do that, or if it's even efficacious to do it. That, meaning that the child can decide that, and we don't, we kind of could let them go. I mean, it's kind of difficult if you're in a home where everybody's religious. What are you going to do? But that's what we have. So basically, the answer, though, now there are other issues, though, with adoption, whether adopting a Jewish-born child or a convert is, this is not your child biologically. A parent of the opposite sex is allowed to be alone with their child because in a healthy, normal situation, nothing improper is going to happen. And so there's no worry whatsoever, as opposed to, people who are not related to each other, to be alone together. And so whether this applies here, it's the same issue with stepchildren, the same issue with, with adopted children. How do we should probably be strict and not permit them to be alone with a family member of the opposite sex. And it could be very difficult in a home environment to do that. And so there are different opinions whether or not. I know the Lubavitcher Rebbe was strict, and he said that one has to be strict about it. However, and so he generally discouraged adoption, but he would tell members of his community who were seeking to adopt a child, whether Jewish or not, to go consult with another rabbi, with Rabbi Soloveitchik or whoever else from Yeshiva University, because his opinion was different. Beyond that, the positive aspect of adoption is that the adoption is seen in Judaism as a very holy thing to do. If one takes an orphan and raises them, it's the greatest kindness that one could do, one of the greatest things, and they are considered in a certain level to be one's children. There's biblical sources for that. Not time to answer, we've already gone on for a half hour, but certainly if one is able to do so, it is a wonderful thing to adopt children, whether Jewish or not Jewish, who are needed to be adopted. And if they're not Jewish, we do, the typical tradition is that we do convert the child and then give them the opportunity to reject that conversion when they become of age, which is not possible for the born Jew. The born Jew cannot reject his Jewishness. All he can do is be an apostate, meaning the Jew could never become a Gentile, and the adult convert could never become a Gentile. They always remain obligated in the Jewish faith. However, they lose if they're not living according to Judaism, and they don't believe in Judaism. If they're apostates and heretics, they're not part of the Jewish community. I always say there's a third category of the apostate, which is neither Jew, certainly not a Gentile, because there's nothing wrong being a Gentile. There's something very wrong being an apostate, but not fully Jewish, except for in the matter of marriage. That's the only area in which the apostate is considered. If they were to marry someone Jewish, the marriage would have a legal standing in Jewish law, as opposed to other, if an intermarriage has no legal standing in Jewish law. And that applies equally so to the one who is Jewish and is not living the Jewish apostate. But with everything else, with the kosher status of the wine, with it being included in a minyan for prayer, and other things generally would not be. Thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, subscribe, comment. We'll see you later.